This is Metabolic Mastery, a core medical technologies podcast dedicated to advancing knowledge and practice in metabolic testing. Welcome to Metabolic Mastery, brought to you by Core Medical Technologies. I'm Dr. Mark Humbert, and this is my co-host, Dr. Cameron Garber. Today we're going to be talking about VO2 and performance, what VO2 max is, why it's not the only important metric in endurance performance, and how tools like Core's Cardio Coach can be helpful in determining VO2 max and other endurance metrics. So let's dive right in. We've talked about this on prior episodes, but let's do a refresher. What is VO2 max? Why is it actually important? What does it mean?
Yeah, so VO2 max really is hailed as like the ultimate fitness metric. If you have a higher VO2 max, you're more fit. And it's become popular again because of its implications in longevity and wellness and things. And so it is an important metric, but it may not be the end all be all, especially in elite athletes. So VO2 max is essentially a measure of maximal oxygen uptake. So how much oxygen can your body utilize in burning calories to fuel activity is kind of the simplest version I can come up with. So the idea is if my body uses oxygen in processing calories to be able to create energy so that I can move or run or cycle or whatever the event is, the amount of oxygen that it's requiring is a really important metric. And we often term that in terms of milliliters of oxygen per kilogram of body weight per minute. And so, fluctuations in body mass will affect that VO2 max number and things, but essentially it's a measure of the efficiency of how efficient is my body at getting oxygen to the muscle and utilizing that to generate fuel. And so really helpful metric in being able to determine a general fitness level. At the same time, when you take elite athletes, you can have two people of very different VO2 maxes and they may perform the same, or two people with the same VO2 max and will perform very differently.
Yeah.
So depending on their training and depending on a host of other factors. And so it may not be the end-all be-all metric in terms of actual performance on race day or on the road. There's so many other things that go into that. And so we use indirect calorimetry or essentially a metabolic cart, which measures the air that we breathe out to see how much oxygen we've utilized. The air that we've breathed out, we can tell how many calories we've burned, how much oxygen we've used. And so with the Core Cardio Coach, we can measure this very easily and see what that VO2 max is because we're able to gather all of the expired air that you're breathing out and measure how much of the air that you breathed out versus what you breathed in, how much of that oxygen has been utilized. And so really easy to get an accurate measurement to see what somebody's VO2 max is, but it doesn't always tell the full story. So by looking at oxygen only, we're missing out on some of the other factors. And so we also look at carbon dioxide, the relationship between carbon dioxide and oxygen, and a bunch of other metrics in our breathing to determine where somebody's fitness and performance levels really might be.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's just having all that data is so useful.
Yeah.
And it's just so much more accessible than it used to be, right? It used to be very prohibitively expensive and just really hard to find. It's like, oh, do I have a university nearby? Maybe I can get this done.
Yeah.
But with technology as it is and being as portable and small and accurate as it is, it makes it a lot easier to get those values. And so I think that is an important point, though, to understand that VO2 max is a really great indicator. And as we've talked about in previous episodes, has really good correlation with longevity, right? Mm-hmm. High VO2 max, I'm probably going to survive a long time, all things considered. But absolutely other metrics that do it. I always tell people it gives us an idea of the size of the engine, but not necessarily like the efficiency of that engine. And that can make a big difference.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it.
And it's wild. It has a huge range. And so in your average person, it's like average, let's say, healthy person is it's like in the 40s. You can see people that are well trained in 50s, 60s, 70s. Really elite athletes top out 80s and 90s. I think you said you tested a guy once that hit unofficially in the 90s, right?
Yeah. So 95.9, which at the time I think would have been a world record. We should have brought in Guinness and retested him.
Guinness up, yeah.
He was the Michael Phelps of the VO2 max test, where his body was just built for that, and then he was also training like a ridiculous amount. But he had a really small body. He weighed 102 pounds or 106 pounds or something like that, and was all lungs and no legs, short legs and big torso.
Big
so he had a high lung capacity for his body mass.
Yeah.
And so he was designed for acing the VO2 max test. But he was a good athlete, but not the best athlete. And his times in racing and things like that. So he was a collegiate runner. His times were good, but not like world class, even though his VO2 max was off the charts.
Yeah. Well, and so that's where some of this nuance comes in, is that you can be well designed for a specific test and do amazing at one specific metric. But performance is this combination of a bunch of different factors. It's not any one thing, right? So many different things play into it, like we'll talk about. But how did I sleep? How am I fueling? How is my body, transporting oxygen where it needs to get used? How are my cells using oxygen? How is my body clearing waste product?
Mental toughness,
just
all kinds of things.
So many things go into that. And so on race day, you can have the best of any one metric or even the best of several metrics, and that doesn't mean that you'll perform the best, because they all have interacting effects. And so I think understanding that can give us some ideas on how to improve our performance and how to put the metrics in their proper place and know what they mean and when to use them.
Yeah.
And so VO2 max, again, gives us the size of the engine. It's kind of where's my ceiling of the ability to use oxygen for work. But again, so many things, other things play into it. One of the complaints that people say is that, it's just VO2 is not predictive of performance at all. Mm-hmm. And yes, with a caveat.
Yes and no.
Yes and no. Yeah, that's a better way to say it.
Yeah. So if you're talking, grandma so-and-so versus elite athlete, you're going to see a big difference in VO2 max, and that would be fairly predictive of performance. So among the general population, VO2 max is a great measure of performance. Among elite athletes, it loses some of the power of predictability because of those additional factors.
Yeah. Side note, I've always wished in the Olympics they could just have one average Joe in each thing, right? Just so we can see how absolutely incredible those athletes really are. Oh, no. I'm sitting on the couch, I could do that. No.
This
you
is
could
Bob
not do that.
From Des Moines.
If you try to do that, exactly.
Yeah. Exactly. He just ate a cheese blizzard right before he came out, and here we go.
Here we go, off to the races. No, so true. But it's really because when you are looking at that subset of elite athletes, all of them have relatively high VO2 maxes, right?
Yeah.
They're maxed out on their VO2 max. Whereas if you look at compared to the average population, you see much more variance in people's performance, right?
Right.
And so that scales as you get higher and higher in your VO2 max, your performance, your race times tend to improve. Again, until that we zoom in on that chunk of elite athletes, and then it's just much less predictive.
Right, yeah. So I one of my favorite examples is was working with two athletes who happened to work at the same running shop together. And they were good buddies, and so they would always razz each other because their marathon time was within 45 seconds. Their best marathon time was within 45 seconds or something very close like that. And then their half marathon time was within 10 or 15 seconds of one another. And so the one was very light, so 140, 145 pounds, and had this really high VO2 max. And the other was about 165 pounds, 170 pounds, and had a much lower VO2 max. But on race day, their performance was almost identical. And so, like we said, there are so many other factors that go into it. And so that even though the one had a VO2 max that was 8 points, I think, higher than the other, their performance on race day was about the same. And so that milliliters of oxygen per kilogram of body weight per minute, if you had taken the 165-pound runner and made him 145 pounds, they probably would have had about the same VO2 max.
Which is wild.
Yeah.
And so I think a couple things about VO2 max is that it does enable better performance overall, but when we're talking performance, there is that wide range of intervals. But again, those two, like they were still healthy, fit individuals, right?
Yeah, both awesome athletes. I mean, they were running like 2:20-something marathons.
Yeah,
which
so
is so
awesome.
fast.
Yeah, so fast. And so if you have a relatively low VO2 max, there's just certain levels of performance that are not accessible to you.
Yeah.
And so again, it's not the end all be all, but it is an important component, and it just unlocks a wider range of performance possibilities.
Yeah.
So let's dive into some of those other factors that affect performance in addition to VO2 max. So one of the major ones is where our anaerobic threshold is. Do you want to explain a little bit more about that and why it's actually important? What does that even mean?
Yeah, so the anaerobic threshold is an interesting concept. So a lot of people see it different ways. It's essentially where your respiratory exchange ratio, well, one definition of it is where your respiratory exchange ratio, meaning the ratio of carbon dioxide to oxygen, becomes 1. So 1.0, meaning the amount of oxygen compared to the amount of carbon dioxide carbon dioxide produced versus oxygen consumed hits that RER of 1. And so that's how some define that. But essentially, that's where carbohydrate metabolism has taken over and fat metabolism becomes very, very minimal. Some would say it's all the way done. We're probably never all the way done with fat metabolism, but the idea is we've switched over to anaerobic metabolism or essentially burning carbs as our primary fuel source. For most people, especially most untrained people, when you've hit that anaerobic threshold, the clock is really ticking. Lactate accumulation starts to happen more rapidly. So that's another way of determining it, is looking at lactate accumulation. But essentially, for the untrained athlete especially, the clock's ticking. Like, most people only have a little bit of time left before they're tapping out because they can't sustain that. Elite athletes train their body to be able to sustain anaerobic work for quite a bit longer. They tend to store more glycogen in their muscles and other things to be able to handle that. Some are really good at lactate shuttling, using lactate as a fuel source while still exercising and things. But yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit more about lactate and how it's produced, why it's important, and how this affects this threshold. And so Cameron mentioned that when we hit that RER of 1.0, when we're at that really intense effort, that our body has switched to mostly using carbohydrate for energy. And that's nice because it can give us really quick energy, much faster than we can get through fat. So fat is a really sustainable energy source. We have tons of it on our body. We can produce it for a long period of energy with it for a long period of time, but that process is slower. Carbohydrate is much quicker. The difficulty is that there are metabolic byproducts of carbohydrate metabolism that lead to fatigue. And so what happens is those byproducts actually make the cellular environment more acidic. And so our bodies can only operate with a narrow range of pH. If that's too high, there's problems. If it's too low, there's problems. And so one of the ways that we deal with that acid is to buffer it in the blood, right? So we're basically neutralizing that and carrying it off to where it can be expelled. And so we're breathing out a lot of that as carbon dioxide. And so that's part of the reason that ratio increases. And so we can only sustain that for a certain period of time until our body says, hey, you need to slow down, you need to stop, because it can't deacidify quickly enough. Basically.
It basically can't keep up with all those chemical processes going on.
Yeah, but what Cameron said is a key point. Lactate is not a waste product. So it is a metabolic byproduct, but people often blame it for all sorts of things.
Muscle soreness,
everything. And so it actually can be used in so many different places.
Yeah.
And so you hear lactic acid, that's actually a misnomer. In the blood, it dissociates into a hydrogen ion and then a lactate ion. And what can happen is we take that lactate and we shuttle it out of the cell to where it can be used in other places. So it can be used by slow twitch muscle fibers that are nearby. It can be shuttled to the heart for energy. It can be shuttled to the liver. It can be shuttled to the brain. And so it can be used in so many different places. And so it's not a bad thing, as people often think it is. So the work of George Brooks, Inigo San Millan, like they've done a lot of work on lactate. And so some really good papers on there. They're great reads, long reads. But I just think that's an important point, is that lactate is actually useful. And so with this, with what Cameron said, as we improve in performance, as we address the anaerobic threshold, the lactate threshold, lots of different names. We won't get into that on this episode.
But we will soon.
But stay tuned, yeah. But it's our body gets better at clearing that out of the cells where it's accumulating into places where it can be used. And so the transporters that get it out of the cell increase. Our mitochondrial density can increase through training, and so they can be better at using that. Our blood networks improve so they can get that out of there and where it needs to go a lot faster. Yeah. And then our body also gets better at buffering some of the metabolic byproducts that make our body slow down. And so this is actually a very modifiable area of performance.
Right. It just takes training in those high intensity zones, which is uncomfortable.
Yep, absolutely.
And that's why typically you see only elite athletes doing that, or predominantly elite athletes doing that because of the discomfort. But that's where the growth really happens. That's where performance really happens, is in pushing that high-end performance and making those high-end physiological adaptations. That's where we see performance increases really happen. So that's why Zone 3 workouts don't really move the needle in terms of fitness and performance, why it's often called junk miles or things, because it's not pushing those high-end adaptations for being able to buffer and shuttle and all of those things that need to be done to sustain efforts in past that anaerobic threshold. And so that's if we really want to see performance improvements, it's getting into those high-end levels of effort.
Absolutely, love it. Okay, let's talk running economy.
Yeah.
What is that? What does it mean? Why is that actually important? I feel like that gets thrown around a lot. And what actually is it?
Yeah. It is an important concept, because understanding not just the size of the engine, but how efficiently is that engine running, essentially.
Yeah.
And so looking at running economy allows us to be able to see the efficiency, to be able to understand better what performance may look like for that individual. And so running economy is essentially looking at calories per kilometer or calories per mile. How efficiently is this engine running?
Yeah. Well, so it's kind of like our gas mileage. It's the oxygen cost to run at a certain speed. And so it's like, if I have a low oxygen cost, I can go much further. I have way more miles to the gallon.
Yeah.
And so that means that I'm going to be tapping into less of my reserves during a race. And so when I hit those I can last for a really long time. And I also have more gas in the tank to really punch it, maybe at the end of the race, or to just push through certain parts of the race, or whatever the event is. And so it becomes really important. And it's influenced by all sorts of things. So our biomechanics, it's influenced by our cardiorespiratory system, right? How good are we at getting oxygen in and where it needs to go? How do our nervous system and our muscles work together? Like, so many different areas that work together, which again lets us know that it's something that's very trainable. Yeah. And it's not necessarily just hitting one of those systems, right? I'm gonna work on I feel like a lot of people are like, oh, I want to improve my running economy, I'm gonna do gait training. And gait training has some problems with it.
Well, pros and cons to gait training. Like, we can somewhat improve our efficiency, but we can also train ourselves into an injury. If we're making a big change in our gait pattern, we can train ourselves into an injury because now we're loading a tissue in a different way than we have in the past. So we can cause problems with that. I find that the faster we try to run, the more our gait kind of naturally corrects itself to be able to run faster. And so we just need to spend more time at that high intensity within reason, balancing your zone 2 efforts and your zone 5 efforts and stuff. But the more you do those zone 5 things, we naturally improve in our economy and efficiency. So gait training can help to a degree, but you have to be really careful to not overutilize that and train yourself into an injury.
Absolutely. It's that adaptation versus recovery, or intensity versus recovery, right? I need to make sure I'm balancing those both.
Yep.
And to that point, we often see people say so many different things about foot strike. And we actually see when people try to change their foot strike patterns, that running economy actually gets worse for a time. And then if people do that in the right way, if that's really important to them for whatever reason, that can get better over time. But that's such a key point of if we're going to make these changes, we need to give ourselves a long enough period of time to make those changes so that we can recover and actually make those long-term adaptations. So the high intensity, again, so important, crucial part of training, but it's balancing that with that base training and doing it in such a way that we get the adaptation without getting burnt out, injured, things like that.
Yeah.
And so that ends up being really important.
Yep.
Okay, so this next one is a really interesting one. This is a newer concept, but it's this idea of fatigue resistance. And so I have a good VO2 max, I've improved my anaerobic threshold, I've increased my running economy, or improved my running economy, I should say, and then I should be performing at the best now. But there's actually this other element that we call fatigue resistance. I think some of the other ones are like physiological durability, or I don't remember all the different ones that have been used.
So many.
So Alex Hutchinson is one of the main writers on this. He's actually written quite a bit about it in the last few years. But what is this idea of fatigue resistance? How does it relate to these other factors? What does it mean?
Well, so essentially it's this concept of, even if my physiological metrics look about the same as somebody else, why is one person going to win the race over the other? And it's usually has to do with a lot of kind of X factor type things, like being able to quiet your brain. Your brain is one of the main calorie burners. Even during exercise, your brain burns a lot of calories. And so they found that people that are problem solving or things like that during endurance events wind up often doing more poorly because they burn extra calories. And so people that are able to shut their brain off better often will have better fatigue resistance. And then there's also elements of just mental toughness, pushing through discomfort and things, and not giving a lot of headspace to discomfort. Because the more you focus on it, I tell people all the time, if they're dealing with an injury and we're helping them run during that injury in a smart way that doesn't make it worse and things like that, don't just go push through pain. There's a formula here for how to do it. But as we're doing that, one of the things I tell people is stop checking in on it so often, because we often, every minute we'll be like, okay, how's my knee feeling? How's my knee feeling? How's my knee feeling? And if you're doing that throughout the entire marathon or whatever the race is, that's going to actually decrease your running economy. You're burning calories in your brain and emotionally and other things like that. You're giving emotional and physical energy to that. And so being able to tune things out can actually be really, really helpful and plays into this fatigue resistance. So it's essentially that grit and toughness factor, but there's actually ways that we can quantify that and measure that in doing VO2 testing. We can look at there's actually a fatigue resistance test that you can do where you have somebody sustain a certain workload and go for a long time and see how they drift in terms of their metrics.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, just such a valuable test. And I think that goes into this idea, again, of how do we use some of the tools at hand to make better decisions and to discover these metrics and apply them to our training. And so, and that's where we love the cardio coach.
Right.
Because it's not just VO2 max, right? Again, a wonderful metric, we want to get that, but there's actual lots of different data that we can pull from that. There's actually a ton of different tests that we can perform. And so this is one of the unique advantages of the Cardio Coach, is that it's not just for VO2 max testing, but it actually allows us to do some long form testing, which means that we don't do the traditional VO2 max protocol, don't do the traditional zone testing protocol. We're just testing them over a longer period of time to zoom in a little bit more on certain metrics. Yeah. And so not all systems do that, right? Not all systems are created equal.
Right. So when we talk about the flexibility of testing, like Mark said, most people know about a VO2 max test. Mark and I actually really quickly the other day came up with 8 different types of tests that you can run other than just a VO2 max or RMR test with the Cardio Coach.
Yeah.
So the Cardio Coach will definitely do an awesome RMR, will definitely do an awesome VO2 max, but there are, 7 other tests that you can do? I guess 7, because the 8 included VO2 max. So there are 7 other tests, and that's by no means an exhaustive list. Those are just the ones that we came up with really quick that we feel like are important for performance metrics. But there are other ways of looking at respiratory values or other things that you could do additional tests for. And so this is, like I said, by no means an exhaustive list, but let's go through some of those key tests that you can do to track different metrics in somebody's testing that can all be done with the Cardio Coach.
Absolutely. If you want to dive in a little bit deeper, get a little bit nerdy with those tests, you can check out our prior episodes on Test What You Intend to Measure.
Yeah.
Some really good stuff in there.
Yeah.
But let's talk about, so let's start with the metabolic efficiency test.
Ooh, yeah.
So that's a good one. So people will talk about your metabolic efficiency point, metabolic effectiveness point, lots of different terminology. But this test actually allows us to zoom in on your efficiency and when it drops below a certain level. So we're looking for that 50-50 fat to carb burn point in the fat max test.
Right.
And so that gives us a good idea of how your body is using fat and carbohydrate to fuel your activity. It gives us a good idea about your metabolic flexibility, how your body switches between different fuel sources. And so at what point am I most efficient? And that can help guide my training, especially that low end base training, so that I'm getting a lot of bang for my buck.
Yeah. So essentially most use for a metabolic efficiency test, use that 0.85 RER, respiratory exchange ratio, or respiratory quotient. And they use that 0.85 value as the 50-50 fuel mix. I don't love always calling it metabolic efficiency. I call that metabolic effectiveness and efficiency, because sometimes you're more efficient at a lower zone or a lower heart rate, but you may not be burning as many fat calories, so you may not be as effective even though you're more efficient or whatever. But semantics there. But essentially, yeah, it's how am I balancing out that fuel use? And where do we train then? If we know our metabolic efficiency point, then we can train accordingly and optimize our fat burn during our training.
Absolutely. Another one that we love to do is what we call the zone test. So similar to VO2 max test, but the way the ramp is done is a little bit different, and we're trying to zoom in a little bit more on those lower zones.
Right.
And with this type of test, we still get a good VO2 max. We're going to get the anaerobic threshold. We're going to get the aerobic threshold, and we're going to get the different heart rate zones, right? Zones 1 through 5. And so going back to these different metrics, right? We talked about the anaerobic threshold before. So if we know where that is, we know what we want to target, right? We're trying to shift that to the right so that we hit that at a higher heart rate.
Yep.
We hit that at a higher VO2. The zones are going to give us a good idea of, again, what's really low intensity, what's moderate intensity, and what's truly high intensity, so that then we can adapt our training to make the most of it, right? Get that high intensity training that really has amazing effects in terms of adaptation, and the speed of adaptation is just much less volume required at high intensity to trigger similar adaptations. It takes more recovery. And so being able to balance that with those other zones and make sure that we're doing the base building and just getting a lot of volume of training, which helps with so many different things. but also impacts what you talked about in terms of that kind of mental toughness.
Yeah.
Just putting a lot of time in helps us to develop that resilience and perform better over time.
Right. Well, and especially when we can polarize our training by doing our slow enough, it allows more gas in the tank to do our faster, and that helps build mental toughness as well by really pushing it hard on our hard days. And so, yeah, super helpful there. Okay, so we talked about zone training, metabolic efficiency. There's the fat max testing, which is essentially kind of what I was talking about before, finding where's that point where I'm most efficient at testing or at training, where I burn the highest number of fat calories. And so a lot of people want that for weight loss, but it's also really helpful in training to be able to see where can that's essentially my forever pace. Right? That's my heart rate where I could literally just go for a really long time, because we're using mostly this slow burn calorie source that we tend to have lots of reserve in. So that's really helpful. Let's see. We talked about the fatigue resistance testing already a little bit. So that's looking for that drift in VO2, heart rate, or RER over time. So picking which metric you want to measure and saying, I'm either going to hold to a specific pace, I'm going to hold to a specific heart rate, or things like that, and see how those metrics drift over time.
Absolutely. The running economy test, we touched on that, but it's running at a couple of different set speeds and getting to a steady state in each of those speeds. Steady state is your metrics aren't changing a lot. Mm-hmm. And so your body kind of settles into this nice spot.
It can be a very long test.
It can be a very long test, yeah. And we're typically not going all the way to max, but we're doing several different paces so that we can build a curve, right? What's happening to your running economy at these different paces? Does it stay relatively flat? Is it increasing a bunch? If that number is increasing, that means that we're using more oxygen per mile and getting less and less efficient.
Yeah.
And so we kind of either want to see it, a small slope or relatively flat over time. And that gives us a good idea that at a range of different speeds, I'm very efficient. Yeah. And like Cameron said, as we train at those top end speeds, we typically improve more and more in that biomechanical, that neuromuscular efficiency, such that value comes down over time and that oxygen cost is less. We're just getting more miles per gallon at a range of speeds.
Yeah.
And we see that even in kind of similarly in cars, right? If you drive 55 miles an hour, your fuel economy is going to be much different than if you're driving at 85 miles an hour. But depending on so many different factors, the aerodynamics of the car, how the engine's working, all those things, that gap will be bigger or smaller. And so we just want to reduce that gap and make sure that at a range of speeds that we're staying very efficient, that we're using oxygen very well.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, so I think that hits all the
heart zones. Running economy, tests? We hit. I'm trying to think, and metabolic flexibility, being able to test that.
Yeah. Again, metabolic flexibility, looking at the different substrate utilization, fat versus carbohydrate, and how does that change across a wide range of heart rates. So some people have really good efficiency at lower heart rate zones, but they get above a certain point and they're basically using all carbohydrate. And so again, size of the engine is important, but also how fuel efficient is that engine. And so am I able to switch quickly between fat and carbohydrate depending on the energy demands? That's just a really good indicator of performance, but actually long-term health. People that are metabolically flexible live a lot longer because when they take food in, they can get it to where it needs to go, and we can put some of that carbohydrate and other food that comes in into glycogen storage, and we can just take that energy in and out of cells a lot quicker, a lot more efficiently. And so we don't have, for example, like fat infiltrating the muscle. That's one of the things that happens with people that are metabolically inflexible, is a lot of the fat gets deposited in the muscle, reduces muscle quality. We talked about that in prior episodes.
Right.
And so it's actually a really important thing to have that ability to quickly switch between fuel sources.
Right. It really helps control blood glucose and A1C levels and things like that when we are very metabolically flexible, because it allows your body to make the adaptations it needs acutely, so it's short term, to regulate those, all the different blood, whether it's blood glucose, blood lipids, things like that. It allows us to regulate that better, to keep a more homeostatic value.
Absolutely. All right, so we've talked about some of these different things about our VO2 max, our anaerobic threshold, our fatigue resistance. Now let's get into how can we actually train to improve those metrics.
Yeah.
So let's get into VO2 max first. What are kind of the big hitters to improve our VO2 max?
Go really hard. So that's one of
Push
the
up
things.
against that ceiling.
Yeah, push up that ceiling. You want to go into those higher heart rate ranges and really push those effort levels. You can do interval work. You can try sustained efforts as well. You tend not to be able to go as high. Typically, the longer you go in a high intensity effort, the longer you go, the less high you can go in that. Or you'll start out high and then it'll drop off a little bit. And so you need a mix of both because they create different adaptations, a little bit longer duration of high intensity and then some short bouts where you're going all out. Both are going to create some adaptations that you want in helping to train, your heart, so cardiorespiratory, cardiovascular systems to see those improvements, to be able to deliver the substrates to the muscles more effectively so that you can use them.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, so raising our AT, what do we want to do for that? Again, very similar.
Yeah, a lot of that's similar. Often for AT, you'll see people do a little bit more extended periods of things. So it's longer intervals and things like that for increasing AT. But again, the harder we can push it, the more we'll see improvements there. So yeah, you'll often see a lot more long interval work. So you're talking 3 to 5 minutes or longer there versus like 30 seconds to a minute bouts.
Yeah. And again, this goes back to that idea of being able to clear lactate and take it to where it's being used. And so again, we're having changes to our blood vessel networks. We're having changes to the density of our mitochondria and the efficiency of them, right? We upregulate certain enzymes that help us to process energy quicker and to move things where they need to be. And so again, that high intensity again is a very vital part of this training.
Right.
But we need time for the body to figure out, okay, I'm building this up, then how do I clear it efficiently and over a longer period of time?
Well, and among elite athletes, you'll even see much longer periods of time than 3 to 5 minutes. You'll see, 15, 20 minutes above anaerobic threshold or sometimes longer, depending on the event and things. You can see some pretty amazing adaptations where most of the people that we test, if they're above their anaerobic threshold for 5 minutes, that's pretty good. It's impressive they were able to suffer for that long.
Yeah, so. Yeah. Some people suffer really well.
Yeah.
But yeah, that has huge implications for training because as I'm running a race, whatever event I'm doing, if I can just sustain a higher percentage of my VO2 max without hitting above that lactate threshold or that anaerobic threshold, then I'm going to be able to perform a lot better. I'm going to outlast people. And so it's that high intensity, but it's also, like you said, that volume of training and just doing a lot of that.
Yeah.
Okay, enhancing running economy. So several different things that we can do for this, but I think really the unsung hero is strength training.
All right, that's what I was going to say. Honestly, the biggest differentiator here is strength training.
Yeah, and one of the things, the way that I like to talk about strength training is that it's just expanding our options. If I'm not strong, I only have a certain range of movement patterns, of options available to me. And if I get much stronger, if I improve not only my strength, but strength training also improves the way that our muscles work together and the way that they talk to each other. And so if I'm doing strength training, I'm just doing so much to expand my options for movement. And so I can make quicker changes and I can endure much longer. And so as strength improves, muscular endurance naturally improves as well. So there's ways to focus more on the strength training, ways to focus more on muscular endurance. But again, if I'm just absolutely stronger, I can typically handle more repetitions at a lower intensity.
Right.
And so just strength is crucial in so many things. But also, again, we're looking to build muscle too. And so that's going to help in our speed, in our ability to produce force quickly, our power. And then as we've talked about before, muscle is this master metabolic regulator. And so it helps, it plays such a big part in that metabolic flexibility that we mentioned earlier. And so building muscle is so crucial in not just performing well, but in living well.
Yeah, agreed. The strength training aspect of things is just so important. You can do drills, you can look at biomechanics and all of those things to try to improve your running economy and become a more efficient runner. But if you lack the strength to support that for the duration of your event, it's not going to matter. And we see this all the time in marathoning. I have this picture of some marathoners that I know that are all about the same time. And so you see all 3 or 4 of them at the beginning of the race at the starting line, and there's this picture and they're all up on their toes. They're running with great form and up on their toes. And then there's this picture at the end of the race, of the same race, where they're all 4 kind of pretty close to one another still, rounding this corner, and they're all heel striking. And it's interesting that, and none of these guys like to strength train. And it's interesting how much their gait form changed by the end of the race because of fatigue. And so that's where strength training can really come in and help with fatigue resistance as well as running economy, because you can maintain form for longer when you're not having a breakdown. Often when we see people get niggles, oh, my knee starts hurting, it's because of weak hips or things like that aren't controlling the knee very well anymore. And so now the knee is tracking different than it did at the beginning of the race because of weakness. So strength training is one of the most important things we can do to enhance performance for any athlete. Any athlete.
One of the things that we always say is that your next, especially for runners, your next most important workout may be strength training.
Yeah. Is not your next run, or for cyclists, not your next ride. Your next most important workout is probably a lifting session. And for bodybuilders and weight lifting enthusiasts, I say the same thing. Your next most important workout is probably your next cardio session, because that's going to give them more endurance to be able to keep lifting weights for longer. And so we need that balance for anybody.
Absolutely.
Anyway,
training both. Okay.
I'll get off my soapbox.
Get off your high horse.
Yeah.
All right, building fatigue resistance. What does that look like?
So lots of different thoughts here. Obviously, you need to go for longer periods of time. When we really want to build that long fatigue resistance for long events, we have to practice that somewhat. And then we can do some things that test our mental toughness. We can do intervals in the middle of that. We can do like a fast finish workout, meaning you do a sprint right at the end. Monitoring those types of things. Our fueling strategies can really help us to make sure that we're fueling to have the energy that we need for those longer events, and understanding the impact of fueling on our mental state. That a lot of that fatigue that we're feeling is our brain trying to shut us down, because it's like, hey, at this current rate, I can't handle this much glucose metabolism and fat metabolism at the rate that you're doing it. And so our fueling strategy can get us, this little boost of confidence, essentially, where your brain's like, oh, we've got more calories coming, we're going to be fine. And so we don't hit that wall quite as much. And so figuring out those strategies for you can boost that fatigue resistance as well. Lots of things we can do there, but most of them involve just putting in the work and doing those long runs and long runs, long rides, those longer events. I heard of one cycling team that actually had their riders put their nose in the corner and just pedal for like 3-4 hour rides.
Wow.
In a room by themselves with their nose in the corner. So they had no visual stimulation, no anything, just so that they could learn how to calm their brain.
Yeah.
And tune the world out. And so really interesting, and deal with the boredom of some of those longer events. And so those types of things can help us build fatigue resistance, dealing with both the mental aspects of things as well as the physical.
Well, and I think that's just one thing that maybe doesn't get as much light is that mental aspect, right? We're just
Yeah.
so focused on pushing the body to the next level and how do I perform better, and having things cognitively in check makes such a big difference, right? And that goes back to some of those lifestyle factors. How do I manage stress? How do I manage, how do I manage my mental energy, my fatigue, right? My thinking, how do I make sure that's the clearest as possible? How do I remove as many decisions as possible so that when race day comes, I'm not having to, this and that, right? It's like, maybe I look at the course map, right? Maybe I do a sample ride of that just to give me some more confidence and to build that mental resilience.
Yeah, and I would say working with a sports psychologist, especially if you're working with elite athletes, really, really important.
Yeah.
There's so many factors to elite performance, and working with a sports psychologist to help work out some of those things can be really, really helpful. Because on top of training for your sport, you also have to live life outside of those training hours. And so putting the lifestyle pieces all together with the training is really important. And so sports psychologists can really be helpful there as well.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and we see that, there's people that have really high VO2 max. They've got good running economy. They've got a high anaerobic threshold. And then you take them to race day and they choke, right?
Yeah.
They prepared their body, but they didn't prepare their mind. And so they're not able to deal with the pressure. And so all of those come together, right? Again, it's all those interacting factors that come together to produce performance on race day or whatever the event is.
Yeah. And so one of the things that you can do with metabolism testing or VO2 testing that's really helpful is you can do some of those long event simulations with the metabolic cart on, and you can look at, and this is the fatigue resistance testing and some of those other things, you can look at how is that economy going? How are they doing in terms of keeping their mind quiet and things? You can see spikes in thinking or fatigue or whatever. So when somebody's doing one of these tests and you see, things start to spike, you can ask questions and say, okay, what are you thinking about? What are you feeling? Or were you tuning into a niggle like, oh yeah, I started to feel my heel was feeling a little weird for a second and blah, blah, blah. And you'll see that spike in there. It's really interesting to be able to do that. And so with those long form testing options, it really allows you to dive in and have people come in and do their workouts on the device and really dive into how they're performing and see, is what I think is happening out on the road, is that really happening with my body? And to be able to answer some of those questions by doing a long form metabolic test is really, really awesome.
Yeah. Well, and it can be interesting to do that in different conditions, right? Mm-hmm. Come in and do a workout when I didn't sleep well, or when I'm having a stressful event in my life, or whatever the thing is.
Increase the heat in the room.
Yeah.
You can make it really cold, simulate their actual race environment in different ways. And really interesting to see how those different factors play into their fatigue resistance and mental state.
Yeah. Well, and it's nice because it's adaptable for just your average person that's looking to get healthier or do a little bit better in an event, up to the very elite, right? We can dive in as little or as much as we want to, and it just gives us really great data to work with.
Yeah.
And it's just some fascinating insights into how the body functions and how all those different conditions affect things.
Well, and the brain's effect on so many of those things.
Absolutely.
The brain really does, control, obviously, our movements and performance and things, but it also plays this background role in energy use and fatigue resistance and ability to just push through. And that is an underrated quality that you can actually train in athletes.
Yeah. Well, I think really understanding that the brain is a master regulator. Mm-hmm. We talk about some of the things that slow us down, right? Oh, we've gotten the cellular environment more acidic, or we're mentally tired, or whatever. And those things play into things. But really, the brain is receiving inputs from all our different systems, right? It's receiving from our cardiorespiratory system, from our neuromuscular system. And with all from what are our stressors at the time, and so it's taking all those inputs and it's making decisions based on that. And so I might not be on race day at my absolute physiological limits. The brain might say, hey, given all these different inputs, we're actually going to drop down your ability to output, force to move as quickly because you're just not prepared for this, right? We don't want catastrophic failure, right? The most important thing, the race day is important, performance is important, but keeping us alive is our brain's job.
Yeah.
And so it's just always monitoring what's going on in all of our different body systems and using that to make decisions, right? Am I going to allow them to produce more force with these muscles? And am I going to allow them to continue with this exercise? How am I going to increase the perception of effort so that they choose to slow down? I'm kind of separating it from the person, right? That's all part of us, but
we've all had those days where we feel off and can't really identify why. Like, what's going on? I don't have it in the tank today. And understanding and having this background of your metrics can really help you troubleshoot. Is this a heat issue? Is it a dehydration issue? Is this a poor sleep or nutrition issue? Knowing where your metrics are allows you to look at those things during an event or during your training and say, okay, where are things off?
Absolutely.
And so that's why having good baselines, good VO2 values, and doing this testing can really help you in your performance, is it gives you something to check against. You know your baselines, and so then you can check against that to see maybe why today I'm not performing my best.
Absolutely. It's just that better data used well helps us to make better decisions.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's absolutely accurate.
Awesome. So lots of stuff that we covered, but really, again, this idea that VO2 max is important. It is a kind of a foundational metric, but it's not the only thing. Looking at things like our anaerobic threshold, our running economy, our fatigue resistance, and our overall mental resilience really can help us to put together the picture of what do I need to do to improve my training over the long term, and how do I pull in some of those lifestyle factors to further improve performance and make sure that I'm not missing, some low-hanging fruit that I can improve upon really easily.
Yeah.
Anything to add? I think we can hit all the topics.
I think we did. No, I think VO2 max is like the popular metric that we all talk about, which is super important.
Absolutely.
Still, we should measure that. At the same time, there are so many other ways that you can use the cardio coach in helping people understand their body, how it's performing, and what they can do to maximize that performance. And so don't think of VO2 testing as just a VO2 max test. There's so many other ways that we can test people to get the information that we need to help them improve their performance. And so that's where it's kind of the message is open your mind to the different ways in which you can use VO2 testing, VCO2 testing, to look at different metrics, different components of somebody's performance so that we can maximize their efforts in each of those areas.
Absolutely. No, I love that. I think that's such a key point. And using these metrics regularly, right? This is not just a one and done. This is something that we want to check in on regularly so we can see, hey, is the training matching our goals? Are these adaptations that we want to occur actually taking place? And what do we need to modify to further improve performance?
Yeah.
And so this is just, especially with elite athletes, this is very regular, testing at very regular intervals to make those little changes that are going to eke out that extra 1 to 2% that can mean podium or not. And just for the regular person, also just helping them to feel better during the race and recover better after the race.
Yeah, if I have somebody come to me that says, yeah, I want to improve my running, my racing, things like that, I usually put them on a protocol where they test 3 to 4 times leading up to a race. They'll often test kind of, let's get a baseline, and then do some base training. And then when we come into their actual training cycle for that event, we do one at 18, 19 weeks out, at 9 weeks out, and then during race week, so that we're always updating those numbers and making sure that we're dialed in as to where they need to be in terms of heart rate zones, and we can look at fatigue resistance and other things if we want to.
Yeah.
So really helpful.
Well, so just real quick, talk about the conversation that you often have with people when they come to you and say, I want to run a race at this point.
Oh, yeah, that is often interesting when people are like, oh yeah, I signed up for a marathon, it's in 3 months. And I smile and I go, oh, cool. How do you want that race to go? Like, what's your goal with that race? Are you looking to, get a good time? Or how do you want that race to go? How do you want to feel? And is this the last time you want to race, or would you like to continue to do it? And kind of see where their headspace is at, because I don't want to discourage somebody from doing something, but especially if they've never trained or run a marathon or half marathon before, we have this conversation about, okay, I can get you to where you can finish this race, but how you feel and how things go the 2-3 weeks to 6-8 weeks afterwards may be very different. You won't maybe like yourself for having made this decision halfway through the marathon. You may, all of these things. And so it's setting those expectations of, yeah, can you finish? Yes. Will you perform well? Probably not. Will you be really sore afterwards? Absolutely. Will you be sore for several weeks and maybe have an injury because of this, because you haven't had enough training and time to let your body adapt? And so that's one of the things too, is make sure that your goals that you're training for are realistic with where your current metrics are at and what your training volumes and other things are at. That we're not overshooting those things. I always say you always in your race get the result that you trained for. And so if we track those metrics carefully, if we really look into how somebody's performing leading up to race day, then we can give them a much better idea of how race day is going to go, and especially the weeks after race day, which are really critical in keeping somebody continuing with doing the activity, because we want them to be able to do this for a lifelong thing, and not just, I ran this one marathon one time and it was miserable, but I'm glad I did it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Versus, let's create a lifestyle out of this, make it healthy for your body to do it so it's not beating you up, and it won't be miserable, and you'll actually enjoy running or cycling or whatever. I see that all the time where people sign up for 100-mile bike races as their first race. It's like, well, that's a really long time to be in the saddle, and the amount of training you have to do for that is high. And so and not just to perform well, but to finish safely and to not have an injury or problems afterward. And so that's the thing. We have to train for the event and the day that we want to have. Do we want to be miserable during that day, or do we want to be able to say, I trained well, I raced within my training? Often we push the limits of that versus racing within what I trained for, and then we have injuries and bad days.
Yeah, no, I just love that perspective. And it just stresses this idea that this type of testing is not just for elite level, right? This is for anyone looking to get fitter, to get healthier, and to do so in a way that keeps them in the game over the long term,
and
right?
That's the biggest key, yeah.
That is the biggest key. And so, again, performance at any given event is really great, but like, what is our performance in all of the things that we do in life, in the events outside of the event, right? In terms of recreational activity, in terms of our exercise, in terms of just spending time with other people. Can I do all the things that I want to do? Do my body's processes allow me to handle that, to recover well, to feel good while I'm doing it, and then to feel good afterwards? Because I think that's such an important point, is it's like, great, I performed well, but just like you said, if that was just, I did that one time and that was it, right? I did okay, and then I don't exercise anymore, or I get injured and that takes me out for a long time. Like, how do we keep people in the game, performing well in all the things that they're doing, whether that be life or whether that be elite level events? This type of testing makes that accessible for everyone across that span.
Yeah, you don't have to be elite. And it allows people the opportunity to build up to being elite.
Yeah.
I see that all the time too, where we take people who are just starting out, and the next thing you know, they're qualifying for Boston or other things like that. And by the next thing you know, we're talking like a year and a half, 2 years later,
It's the montage.
Yeah. It takes time, but people can really improve and build and become great runners over time. But it does take time, and it takes the right data. And so that's why I love testing with a cardio coach, is it allows me to have the right data that I need to be able to help people accomplish their goals. And without that, I'm just kind of stabbing in the dark. I'm not really able to say, this is how you need to train based on where your body is physiologically at this moment. And that's the key advantage that testing gives me, is it says, this is where your body's at. Here's how you can train to make improvements while avoiding injury, fatigue, burnout.
Absolutely. Love that. Well, thanks so much for joining us. As always, remember to like, follow, subscribe, and you can get more content like this. Have a great day, and we'll catch you next time. This podcast is a production of Core Medical Technologies. Ready to take your metabolic testing to the next level? Visit core.com to learn more about purchasing our metabolic test equipment.